Everybody to the zoo and for coming out. I hear some of you haven't been out here since we did these new things. So welcome. We hope you come back again. My name is Gretchen Ziegler. I'm the zoo manager. We're really excited about this lecture in particular, but these lectures are a new program that we started last fall. A long-term goal of ours to have conservation lectures for the community that are free, that help spread and promote conservation awareness in our community. And this is actually the last lecture of the season. We're going to take a hiatus for our busy season and then start it back up next fall. We hope to have a fabulous lineup then too. So we hope that you will continue to come back and join us for these. I wanted to just mention a little bit about our Conservation Advisory Committee. That's another new program we started about a year ago. And this is a committee made up of staff members and some board members of the Zoo Foundation, as well as members at large and community members. And we get together and we try to think of ways that we can have a more active role in conservation beyond the zoo boundaries. And one of the ways we do that is we created a conservation fund. $1 if you join the zoo, $1 of your membership goes to this fund. And we have other fundraising ways that we collect money. And I'm going to have Nicole, one of our conservation members, advisory committee members, hold up our donation box. It's a little tree. And if you folks feel generous tonight, feel free to put some money in the back there. And just a little bit about what we do with the Conservation Fund. Primarily what we do is we offer small conservation grants for projects. And so we just did our first round of conservation proposals. We solicited proposals. We got about 11, and then the committee reviewed those proposals and selected some folks that we think are worthy of some conservation funding. And so we're going to announce those award grants next month. So that's very exciting stuff. And if you're interested in joining this committee, we need some more members. We'd love to talk with you, and you're welcome to take my card. There's a stack of them up here on the table if you want to get in touch with me. With no further ado, I think I'll just go ahead and introduce our speaker. This is Lowell Diller. And he's a senior biologist with Green Diamond Resource Company, and he's going to talk to you about spotted owls and barred owls. Take it away.
Thank you, Gretchen. Can you get that started up?
It should be, yeah.
Well, thank you, Gretchen. This particular talk, I've given this twice now, and it makes me very nervous. I'm normally not that nervous in front of an audience, but I've always avoided controversy, and I don't know how I ended up not doing a very good job of that. So there will be some controversial things going in this talk, I suspect, and I'm going to try to move through this pretty quickly because I'm very anxious not only to try to educate people on this issue, but I'd also like to get a sense of what people are thinking about this issue. So that's what I'll try to do, so I'll move pretty quickly, but again, I'm hoping to leave time at the end for some questions. So we're talking about these two species, of course, that you've already heard about. How do I make this work? I guess I didn't turn it on. There we go. Okay, now it's on. Right, and I think as most of you know, that the spotted owl was initially listed back in 1990, and it was primarily due to loss of and fragmentation of habitat. And this is a picture from up in the northern portion of the range where the spotted owl feeds primarily on flying squirrels, and that's my one little PowerPoint gimmick. I try not to overdo the gimmicks, but I had to do at least one there. And so what this means in this portion of the range is the reason why this type of thing is particularly devastating for spotted owls in this portion of the range is because they're roosting and nesting in the older habitat, but their primary prey, the flying squirrel, also occurs in that older habitat. So fragmentation such as this is clearly bad for the spotted owls. In the redwood region where I've done all my work, it's quite different. This is within the range of the species. The highest densities we have anywhere are here in the redwood coastal zone, and they're not necessarily associated with old growth. It's a different situation here. And the key difference here is because of this guy, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the dusky-footed wood rat, but you've probably, if you've been out in the woods, you've seen these nests they build, and generally they're associated with younger stands. So in this portion of the range, the owls still roost and nest in the older forest, but now their primary prey, their groceries, are in the younger stands. So now the fragmentation, they have a new term for it here, where it's a good thing, they call it habitat heterogeneity. In the northern portion of the range, they call it habitat fragmentation. But so down here, we refer to this as habitat heterogeneity. And that's one of the reasons why we have lots of owls down here, and that's one of the reasons why they can be associated with areas that have harvesting. So there's quite a different picture depending where you are. And in general, I'm not going to spend much time on this and any of these habitat things. If at the end, if you have the need, you can ask some questions. But to deal with the spotted owl on federal lands, the primary mechanism was the Northwest Forest Plan that was implemented in 1994. And essentially what this is all about is a system of reserves up and down in Washington, Oregon, and California, with the idea that these older reserves would provide core areas that would support roosting and nesting spotted owls. There would be enough of those, and the spatial distribution of those would be such that would allow the owls to move from one area to another. That was what was supposed to work throughout most of the range. Here in Northern California, where I did my work, again, we had a different situation because we discovered we had lots of spotted owls on managed timberlands. That led to, in 1992, the development of a habitat conservation plan. At the time, what is now called Green Diamond was called Simpson, and that's who I was initially working for. And we did this HCP to deal with spotted owls on managed timberlands. And I'm only mentioning this because this is the reason why we have a lot of information on spotted owls. You basically have a timber company, and this is one of the things I like. Whoops, hit the wrong button here. Too many buttons. One of the things I like to brag about, one of the ironies, is now we have the single largest data set on spotted owls of anyone in the country. And this is a timber company, and again, it's because of the high densities of spotted owls that we have in this region. We've, as you can see here, we've now banded over 1,800 spotted owls in the 20 years we've been doing this. So we've been doing lots of different types of things. The demographic studies are mark recapture, where you capture the juveniles or adults, and you mark them, and then the whole idea is to get estimates of survival from that mark recapture data. And we also, of course, determine the fecundity, the nesting. We've done studies on the wood rats. We've done telemetry studies to see where they're foraging and all this kind of stuff. And this would be another whole talk to go into that. But basically, what I can say in terms of the conclusions of that, and the red is supposed to be the best habitat. This is habitat that, according to all the work that we've done from 20 years of gathering data, should support an increasing population of spotted owls. So everything in red there, and this is projecting into the future, clear out into 2060, everything looks pretty rosy for spotted owls in this region. And so, next. So what's happening with the spotted owl? Well, this is the most recent publication on the trends of northern spotted owls. Was published just this last year, but the interesting thing, and this is the problem with peer-reviewed science, it takes so long to come out. You note that this actually, the data only went through 2008. So this is the most current thing you can read, but it's already ancient history. And so every 5 years, we do this big, what we call meta-analysis, where everybody that's doing spotted owl studies, the mark recapture, gets together, analyzes their data, to look at the trends. And so here's what these trends show through 2006. These are all study areas in Washington, and you may not be able to see that, but what that's showing is a 50% decline per year. Think about 50% decline per year. How long is your population going to be around? Basically, all three of these demographic study areas in Washington, the spotted owls are virtually gone, and we're kind of a tight-knit cliquish group, all these spotted owl biologists, so we all know each other and sharing information. And one of them I was talking to just recently that was at the Rainier study area, he said, I'm not going to get invited at the next meta-analysis. I won't have any spotted owls left to analyze. So Washington looks very dismal. If you look at this, you would say, well, Oregon doesn't look too bad. Here's one that looks like it's going downhill, and here's one that's been downhill for a while. But look at, here's one up by Roseburg, the Tyee area, that looks actually like things are pretty rosy. But you look, remember, that's 5 years out of date. And when I talked to the biologists there, they're like at the Tyee, this is my good friend, I just forgot her name, Janice Reed. The last time I talked to her, she said we've lost roughly 50% of our spotted owls since the last meta-analysis. So these things are out of date. They look like things are not so bad, but in fact, things are going downhill very rapidly. Here we are in California. Hoopa at the time looked like everything was great, and I don't see Mark Higley here, but the last time I talked to him, he said they virtually have no spotted owls left at all in Willow Creek. So just in that last 5-year interval, they went from things looking stable to now virtually every place they go, they have barred owls. And here we are at Green Diamond. Oh shoot, there's too many buttons here. Everything was looking good through about 2000, and then we've started going downhill in the last 10 years. So what's happened since then? Of course, I don't think anymore everybody's pretty aware of this. So there's still, I want to make sure that I reinforce this several times, that there's still issues about habitat. So the habitat issue hasn't totally gone away, but relatively speaking, the habitat should have been stabilized. The projections were when they did the Northwest Forest Plan that there would still be a decline for a short time, kind of a lag effect, and then the population should stabilize. But in fact, it's going down, and now it's going down even more rapidly. So obviously, we have a new threat involved. And of course, this is the barred owl. And a few of the life history comparison I want to talk about. And one, I'm going to get my other pointer. It's easier if I have one in each hand. There. Now I won't get confused. One of the key things that I want to point out that's very critical here is that both of these species are strongly territorial, which means they defend space. So they have an area that they defend, and they won't let members of the same species, unless it's their mate, and they won't let members of a closely related species into that space. So they can't share that space, and that's a real critical aspect. The other thing that's important, these are both females. This is a very large female spotted owl, the biggest one we ever weighed. She was about 800 grams. Here's a big female barred owl. She's about 1,200 grams. So they're a bit larger. The males in both species are smaller, but still the barred owl is a little bit larger. Some of their vocalizations and behaviors, and in fact, I forgot I was going to bring in my recorder so you could hear the different vocalizations. And maybe afterwards, if some of you are interested, I could bring that in. But their hoots are somewhat similar, and if you were totally naive, you probably wouldn't immediately recognize the difference. But the spotted owl hoot is the basic 4-note hoot, and it has a cadence hoot, 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 hoot. And the basic barred owl call is an 8-note, and it ends up, the mnemonic for it is who cooks for you all. There's a drawl at the end. And in both species, the male, even though they're smaller, has a lower pitched call than the female. And the other way you tell barred owls apart is that the female has a longer drawl at the end, has a more southern sounding call, the drawl. The male, that last drawl is somewhat clipped. But they have lots of different vocalizations that they both do under different circumstances. But again, they're relatively similar, and they obviously recognize each other when they hear it. Now, one of the behaviors, I don't know if you can see this in this light, but I don't know, how many of you have been out and seen spotted owls? Or the other way around, who hasn't been out and seen spotted owls? So actually quite a few of you. Well, one of the things about spotted owls, and this word unique is often overused, but in this case it actually is unique. The behaviors of spotted owls is the fact that they so quickly acclimate to a person and interact with a person. And I like to use this example. This was back in 1990. This was a naive owl in terms of people. And I was going in there to what we call mouse it to determine where the nest was. I put a mouse down on the log right in front of me. And it flew down and took it and flew up in the trees to deliver it to the female. That's what I was there for. Well, I couldn't see where it was going. It would disappear. So I put out another mouse. Same thing. Every time it would disappear on me and I wouldn't see it. So I got to my fourth mouse and I got the mouse out and I looked around. The male isn't nowhere around me. I'm looking, I was like, where in the heck did that male go? Because I thought he had delivered the mouse. And I happened to look down and here he is sitting on the log at my feet waiting for his next mouse. And that was the fourth mouse, and he had already figured out like most birds, you could have a bird feeder out your whole life, and if they're not bird seed in there, will they come knocking on your door looking for food? No. But spotted owls quickly learn that you're the source of that mouse, and he was waiting for his next one. And when you walk out of the woods, they'll follow you many times, looking for more, and when you come in the next time, they'll fly up to greet you waiting for their next mouse. So it's really hard as a biologist not to fall in love with spotted owls because of this behavior. Many things we study we don't ever get to see, but spotted owls are truly unique in this behavior. In contrast, barred owls, and a lot of people think this is intelligence. This has nothing to do with intelligence, in my opinion. In fact, I think that spotted owls and their behaviors actually shows more intelligence because of their adaptability. But the barred owls are inherently warier, and they don't generally do this kind of thing. Mousing them is very difficult because usually they don't let you get close. So they just have a very different behavior, although you can sometimes mouse them. So there's really fundamental differences. But one of the interesting things I want to point out is these spotted owls seem so docile and so easygoing and everything, but if you get around their nest tree, generally you're okay, but if you start to climb their nest tree, I guarantee you they will attack you every time. Goshawks will make a lot of noise and swoop at you. Spotted owls will come in and grab you every time if you start climbing their nest tree. So they're not totally docile. A couple of other life history comparisons is that they have similar reproductive strategies, which means they live a long time as adults and have relatively low reproduction. But barred owls, it's a little bit higher. They'll often have 2 or 3 young, where spotted owls generally only have 1 or 2. And also, the barred owls start nesting 2 to 3 weeks before the spotted owls, so that means they always get a jump on getting the nest sites first. In terms of their food habits, spotted owls primarily feed on small mammals, with, in this area, wood rats being the key. Other areas, it's flying squirrels. Tree voles are important. Here's a spotted owl sitting with a wood rat, mostly consumed. The barred owls will take a lot of the same small mammals, but the absolutely most incredible thing about the barred owls is what they can eat. They can eat everything, from earthworms on up, fish, snails, crayfish. There's just almost nothing they don't eat. Millipedes, nothing eats millipedes. They eat millipedes. So it's just remarkable the things that they will eat. And one of the other aspects about their behavior, and this is actually what potentially creates one of the problems, is related to this picture. And this is a study that was done in the Central Coast Range with David Weens, who was doing his PhD, and he was doing telemetry on spotted owls and barred owls. And this one barred owl kept landing at this same perch in the evening. And they finally got curious about what's going on. Well, in this stream, in the evening, if you've ever been around some of these coastal streams, in the evening the crayfish emerge thinking they're safe because all the predators are gone. They emerge right at dusk and come creeping around. Well, here they went to this perch. And here's what this barred owl had been taking hundreds of crayfish. He did a bunch of food habits work. He had one other that in one pellet had over 80 snails that had eaten. So the barred owls are really good at finding a locally abundant prey item and then just really nailing that. And so we don't know very much about this. By the way, screech owls have largely disappeared in Washington, where they used to be relatively abundant. No one's really done any studies on this, but there's concerns that maybe that's related to the barred owl. But one of the other things we haven't investigated are what about some of these other species that are not adapted for nocturnal predators, things that congregate at ponds. And we actually have some evidence from some of these barred owls that we've collected that they're feeding at ponds or somewhere because they have slime all over their feet and legs. And so potentially, and this is in the fall of year, you could imagine as the northwestern salamanders are emerging at night, they could be sitting there along the shore just taking them as fast as they emerge. So that's one of the things that they're capable of doing. In terms of the habitat, as far as what they nest in general, you're going to find both species for their roosting and nesting tend to select the same places. In fact, we've had where barred owls have come in and displaced spotted owls. They oftentimes take the exact same nest tree. So they both tend to like the older trees that have cavities and structures and the like for their nesting. So they use similar structures. The barred owls generally, though, are found on somewhat flatter slopes. They tend to like the more mesic and other more moist conditions, but they have overall greater habitat flexibility. And one of the studies is not out yet, but some work that is in press is some work that Katie Duggar did out of Oregon State, and they looked to see in this was a study in the Southern Cascades, is there any habitat that spotted owls use that barred owls don't use? And they concluded no, there was nothing. So there's no habitat that's exclusive to the spotted owl, at least that we're aware of from that study. So the trends, what about the trends in barred owl numbers? Here's an example. This will show you a 20-year snapshot of the increase in the numbers of barred owls. So that was 20 years worth of data there, that was an area in Washington. Here's in Oregon, and this is the general trend that everywhere in their expansion you've seen is they go along low numbers, and all of a sudden, this is in Oregon, they hit like a critical mass where suddenly their numbers take off. So that's the trend. We saw the same thing happen here, but down here it happened more around 2000. Their numbers were low, and all of a sudden they take off. Here's just a trend showing a similar thing for California, how rapidly their numbers expand. And these, by the way, are, that's just a fraction of what's out there because no one's actually surveying for them, at least they haven't until very recently. So what about some of the interactions of these two birds? I've overheard a number of people talking on the streets. This obviously become a big topic now, and several times I've heard people talking about this. And they thought the primary problem is the fact that you have these two species and they're hybridizing. And when they hybridize, you get what's it called? Anyone know? A barred and a spot is called a spard, that's correct. So in fact, this is a hybrid that I picked up and is now at the game pens at HSU. Didn't know what to do with it. My permit wouldn't allow me to capture it because it wasn't a spotted owl, and I couldn't deal with it the other way that I'll talk about here in a minute either, so it ended up in the zoo. But anyway, this hybridization does occur, and virtually all of the examples have been found. It's a male spotted owl with a female barred owl. So there's going to be a huge discrepancy in their size. I don't want to spend the time now, but afterwards, if you want, I have two hypotheses as to why it tends to always be that way, the male spotted owl with a female barred owl. But in any case, they produce hybrids. This is not a big issue. In general, the hybridization occurs on the leading edge of this expansion, and it's when barred owls are in real low numbers, and most of us can relate to this in the human aspect, at least a lot of guys can. It's a desperation factor, right? So when there are very few other barred owls around, out of desperation, they end up with a spotted owl. And so you get some hybridization occurring at that phase. And these hybrids are fertile, they can reproduce and all that, but they're from an evolutionary standpoint, they're a dead end because when you're an owl, it's all about hooting. You got to hoot to attract a mate. You got to hoot to feed your mate. And so their hooting, a spard owl, is a mixture. It doesn't sound like either species. So they're a misfit, as it were. They can't attract barred owls and they can't attract spotted owls, although occasionally hybrids have gotten together. But in general, it's been a dead end. It's not a key conservation issue, the fact that they hybridize. Physical attacks, there has been several cases documented of barred owls. Well, they were circumstantial, but pretty strong circumstantial evidence that a barred owl killed a spotted owl. But that's probably not the real issue. The real problem is likely to be either resource competition. By that I mean they're competing for the same things to eat or whatever. Or it's interference competition. In other words, they don't get along. They're defending the same territory, and that's the kind of competition that's the problem. Well, in general, although this hasn't been definitively shown yet, the best evidence right now is that the primary interaction, in terms of what's causing a problem here, is this competition for space because of territorial behavior. And this is the John Ween study area. This is one of the few areas that have been thoroughly, completely surveyed for spotted owls and barred owls, both species. And in this area, there's 19 spotted owl territories and 82 barred owl territories. And I don't know how well you can see this, but this is Google Earth of the same area. And a lot of this is fragmented. And you can say, well, yeah, you could understand why the barred owls would be there because it's fragmented. But this portion of it is not fragmented. If you look up here, and it's hard to relate to where that is, see all these barred owl numbers in here, which is this area? So the barred owls are in both areas. And the fundamental problem for spotted owls in this area is that everywhere they want to go, they're running into a barred owl. And since they both are trying to defend space, and if you're the smaller one, you're going to lose out. So we think that that's the key problem. So the basic conclusion is that spotted owls have been declining throughout the range, with the greatest declines where the barred owls are most abundant. There's a variety of correlational studies and a lot of anecdotal evidence that says that this is due to interference competition. But we still are in a situation where we don't actually know the specific roles that barred owls are playing in this decline. And then, of course, we also don't know if that's the cause. What should we do about it? Well, one of the things that a lot of people are concerned with is how did the barred owl get here in the first place? And for a lot of people, that makes a huge difference in terms of how they view this problem. And there's basically two hypotheses. One is the boreal forest concept, and the idea here, and this is based on because the current range of the barred owl includes this area up in here, that they moved across the boreal forest. And this potentially could be natural, but it also could be related to global climate change. There might be some things involved there, that the boreal forest used to be too severe and extreme, and now it's not quite so extreme, so they're able to move across there. There's also been some harvesting in here, so maybe the changing of the harvesting in the boreal forest has made a difference. Well, the other potential route is the Great Plains route, and this was basically facilitated by European settlement of the plains and the changing of the plains, creating essentially stepping stones. The prairies, when the first settlers got there, were vast expanses of prairies with very little in the way of trees, including along the riparian areas because of the number of bison, frequent burning, and so forth. And clearly that has all been changed from European settlement. And this is supported by historical records, and I'll show you a picture of that. There's also a general thought that once they got to the northwest, that their rapid expansion may have been facilitated by the fragmentation of those older forests. So in other words, you might make the argument, if the northwest had still been much of it relatively contiguous older growth forest in the range of the spotted owl, possibly the barred owls, when they got here, wouldn't have done very well, and their expansion wouldn't have been so rapid. So this is the historical data that I was talking about, and you can see the oldest records, 1873, this is on the Missouri River in Montana. So some of the oldest records that are there. Now the interesting thing is they're no longer there. So the question is, why were they there back in the 1800s? But potentially, again, this was part of the stepping stone that allowed them to get to the West Coast, and from there they've expanded. This is some thoughts that came from the EIS that's out now on the barred owl removal experiment. And basically they concluded from this is they call it a cryptogenic species. In other words, they can't be sure how it got here, whether or not it was native or a natural expansion or if it was human caused. So they basically say we don't know, and we probably will never know for sure exactly how it got here. They further argue, though, that even if it wasn't facilitated by human expansion, they're saying that we have obviously changed the environment for the spotted owl in the West, so doesn't that mean that we have some responsibility to deal with it? So this is their statement, is that we believe that humans bear at least some responsibility to investigate and mitigate the negative impact of the barred owls. So in terms of what to do about this, the first official recommendations, I guess you would say, came out with the Northern Spotted Owl Recovery Plan, in which they called for barred owl removal experiments. In fact, one of the recovery actions to design and implement these removal experiments, and basically saying, given that how severe this is, that this is a very high priority to do this. And why removal experiments? Well, the reason why they were picking removal experiments is there was a group of scientists that got together back in 2007, I believe it was, and to determine how best do you assess the impacts of barred owls on spotted owls. And the conclusion, overwhelming conclusion, is the only definitive way to do it is a removal experiment. And carrying on with that theme is now what's out. And if you want to go to the Fish and Wildlife Service website, the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Service website, you can now download this. How many have actually seen this EIS that's out? No one. Okay, well, it's out there. And it is, parts of it are pretty boring to read all through the alternatives and stuff. But if you're interested in this subject, there's a lot of very good information here that you can download and look at. And they're promoting the idea that we need to do these removal experiments. And basically the idea is that you need to use what's called a Bakke study. In other words, you need information prior to the treatment, the pre-treatment data. And then, and that would best come from like a spotted owl demographic study area, similar to the green diamond study area, something that's been going a long time. So in other words, we have all this pre-treatment data to show what's going on before you conduct the experiment. And then the ideal experiment would be if you have roughly equal numbers of barred owls and spotted owls. And this is the part where things start getting a little dicier for me, I guess, is I don't know how many of you know this, but I have been involved, and Green Diamond has been involved with a pilot removal study. Now, maybe you thought I was just going to talk about the EIS to propose it, but it actually has started happening. And part of the reason it happened is because I was on the spotted owl recovery team, and they realized to do it on federal lands, it's going to take forever. They have to do an EIS. They get, all of you folks have to comment on it. They have to decide based on your comments, what do we do? And it's going to take forever. Being on private land, they said, Diller, you could do an experiment with a scientific collecting permit and provide some pilot data to help us understand the cost and feasibility of doing this. So that's basically how got involved. The initial collections were back in 2006. The California Academy of Sciences wanted to collect a few barred owls for their museum to look at a number of different things, the genetics, as well as some of the disease issues. They were concerned about what new diseases are barred owls bringing into the area. So they collected some barred owls. Some of them were on our property. And then we initiated a pilot removal study in 2009 on Green Diamond's ownership. So when you talk about a removal experiment, of course the question is, well, how do you remove them? Everybody would love to, including me, say, well, wouldn't it be great if we could catch them and just take them away somewhere so we can do our experiment? Well, this is the way we generally capture them. This is a decoy here. What you can't see is there's 2 nets set up there, Dugaza nets, a breakaway net. And you're calling, you have this remote caller there, and you call, and they think there's an intruder there, and they fly in to attack the intruder, and when they do, they get caught in the net. And this, maybe I'm just not very good at it, but we average about 40 hours for every capture that we got. It's very labor intensive. The other problem with it is you can generally only get one of the pair, and it's the female. The females are bigger, they're the aggressive ones, they do all the heavy lifting in terms of territory defense. Males hang back and hoot, and they're supportive of the females. They say, honey, that guy sounds pretty, that gal sounds pretty mean, you better take her on. So the males are picking fights, but they're not following through. So anyway, you could catch the female, but generally you don't catch the male. And if you don't catch them both, you have done no good at all, because you still have a bird defending a territory. So they both have to be gone to do an experiment. And then so the capture techniques are much more difficult. And then the other issue is, what do you do with them after you capture them? And for example, Fish and Wildlife Service contacted all of the states in the east to say, would you take any barred owls? They have literally, it's an amusing number. They have like takers for 7 barred owls total, is what they got. Because none of the other states, even in places where barred owl numbers are declining in the east, they said this is not, bringing more barred owls wouldn't help. This is a habitat issue. We've lost all of our older forests, so we don't have the forest. So it doesn't do any good to bring the owls in. So the issue is, what do you do with them? And basically there is nothing to do with them other than if you were to build a bunch of giant aviaries or something like that and keep them in captivity indefinitely. So the other alternative is lethal removal. And the difference about lethal removal is this bird is territorial and it has an imperative to defend its territory, so it's going to fly in to defend its territory. And that's, in fact, that bird right there was taken, the picture was taken because that bird flew in to defend its territory. And so logistically it's easy. Emotionally it's not so easy. As a biologist, it's not easy to do this. Lethal removal is not an easy thing to do. When Jack Dumbacher collected the first one, I couldn't even watch. I had to go away and, you do your thing, I can't even watch. So it's a difficult thing to do, and for a while I said, I can't do this, I just can't be part of this. It's just not, you study these birds, you can't bring yourself to shoot a bird that you study like that. So it was really difficult. And for the first year, Jack did all the collecting, and someone would come up to me and say, I hear you're shooting barred owls. I'd say, I've never shot a barred owl. And then I realized, that's really insincere. And I kind of thought as a kid, it was hard. I grew up in a rural area where if you wanted to eat meat, you had to kill an animal. And that was hard for me, but I realized that that's one of the realities, harsh realities of life. And I thought, well, the same thing with this. Okay, if I believe this experiment really needs to be done, then I got to suck it up and do it myself. So that's what I'm doing. And some of the basic logistics is a shotgun is still the preferred tool. And if you've ever seen pictures of Audubon, what's his primary tool? It was a shotgun. And for collecting birds, a shotgun makes sense because you get a good specimen and something that dies quickly and humanely, but is a good specimen. And it's still used to this day as a primary tool. You don't hear much about people collecting birds anymore, but people like Jack Dumbacher go all around the world, not just indiscriminately collecting like they used to, but for important reasons, collecting a small number of birds in different places for a variety of very important reasons. And museum specimens are extremely valuable, and they will be there indefinitely to provide huge amounts of information, changes in parasite rates, toxin levels, all kinds of things. So we really do need these things, and people really do collect them. So anyway, use a shotgun that's 20 gauge. Use an aim point because when you're shooting at night, you want to be very sure of your target. This is not hunting. You're not shooting at these things on the wing. You want it to be, you want it clean and lethal. The remote caller is very important because you can string that up. I'll show you another picture. Initially, I thought I needed a decoy because in the daytime, to capture one, you have to have a decoy. So I thought I needed a decoy. And my wife attempted to make this decoy. I think it looks like a disco owl, but not a barred owl. But anyway, I realized in the daytime, if you're going to do this in the daytime, you still a lot of times you do need it because they're more sensitive. But at night, you really don't need this. The dog is there because at night these birds fall in dense brush, and every one of these birds is meant to be collected as a scientific specimen that's going to the California Academy of Sciences. So the dog doesn't retrieve them. I don't want him touching them. But he goes and points them so that I can find them. About half the birds I wouldn't find without my trusty bird dog. So you string it up like that, and you set back at a distance, and you call in the bird, and it's again, logistically, it's remarkably easy to do. And this is what you end up with. I hope I don't shock anyone here, but if you're going to be involved in the debate on this, you need to know what's going to happen. These are not going to be, I'm not trying to be too graphic here, but these are not going to be bloody things that are laying around. These will be, this is what they look like, and this is the way they'll end up. And they utilize virtually every aspect of these things for all kinds of different analyses, food habits analysis, genetic stuff, looking at parasite loads. And in fact, virtually every time I go out, not every time, but many times I go out, I have people with me because there's 2 different studies going on looking at blood parasites and other diseases associated with barred owls, and so they want to get samples while the bird is fresh. So we oftentimes have people going with me to get those collections. So what are the few of the things that we've learned? I know I'm running out of time. I move through here pretty quickly, but basically one of the things we looked at is what we kind of call case histories, where it's a site that used to be occupied by spotted owls. Barred owls come in and displace it, and now we go and remove the barred owl and we document what happens. And in those cases, we have 7 of these territories now that meet the criteria where we've been able to follow them up and determine what's happened. And they've all been reoccupied by spotted owls. The time was as little as 13 days. And that was the first time I checked, and as much as 156 days. In fact, this one, I know I'm running over, I can't resist telling this story, but I went back into the site because this was so amazing. Went back into the site. We hadn't seen spotted owls at this territory for 3 years, and they're banded birds. Went into the site. I checked for the first time 13 days after. This was when Jack removed me. 13 days later, the spotted owl pair flew up to meet me looking for a mouse at their old territory. And it's like, where the hell have they been for 3 years? Well, presumably, in this case, they were hanging around the periphery of their territory, waiting for a chance to get back in. As soon as the barred owls were no longer defending their territory, and by the way, territorial birds generally, when they come off the roost at night, an hour before they get active, they hoot a couple of times to let all their neighbors know this is still occupied territory. So presumably, that's how they were able to reoccupy so quickly. One of the issues, of course, is recolonization by the barred owls, and so far we've had 4 sites that have been reoccupied by the barred owls. And no, I'm looking at the wrong thing. These were 4 sites that were occupied by the original residents. One of them that hadn't been seen for 7 years, and the rest were occupied by new birds. This is, it was at 3 sites where the barred owls have moved back in and recolonized the site. So some of the things that the Fish and Wildlife Service was very interested in is can we actually do this? Because one of the issues, in fact, that's how I got involved in this, is I was on the recovery team, and everybody kept saying, there's no way we can do this. And I said, we don't know that we can't do this. Someone needs to try. And everybody, no one wanted to do it, and finally said, okay, I'll try it then. And so this was a very important thing to know, how feasible is this? How much is it going to cost? Well, I kept track. Every time I go out, I keep track from the time I leave the truck until the time I get back to the truck. And you can see on average it takes about 106 minutes. But look at the range, 5 minutes to 295 minutes. So the majority of them are 15, 20 minutes. That's all it takes. You get to the site, you call, the birds fly up to defend their territory, and it's all over. Efficiency, gotten 100% of the territorial birds. So if you're a territorial bird, you have to defend your territory by definition, right? The only ones we haven't gotten are floaters. These are birds moving through the area looking for a territory, and they don't have a territory to defend, so when you hoot at them, they fly away from you. They don't come to you. And we had a couple of others that we called colonizers that came in. They were there at a territory one time, you came back the next time, and they had moved on. So if they're a resident bird, they 100% effectiveness. So what does this look like? This is in our demographic study area where we survey the entire area every year, and this is empirical data. These are not estimates. And here was at the low point in 2008, and right in here is when we started removing. This is for all of the sites on Green Diamond's ownership. But the most dramatic is in comparing the treatment and control areas here. This is the Corbell Mad River treatment area. This is just over the hill in Redwood Creek. And here's where we started removing barred owls. And in 1998, we used as the reference year, because that was about when barred owls, or before, about 2000 is when barred owl numbers started getting high enough that they started to decline. You can see in the Mad River, we've already exceeded the reference number in terms of the number of active owl sites, so that the owls are coming back quite quickly. So this suggests that based on these preliminary results that a removal experiment is feasible, and that you're likely to get some fairly dramatic results. We're not done. This study is designed to go through 2013. So we haven't actually estimated what are the impacts on survival rates and things like that. But just from what we've seen so far, it seems pretty obvious that it's going to be quite significant. It's not, one of the things I like in a study is you're not going to have to do a lot of fancy statistical analyses to show that that you saw those two graphs, that those are different. But ultimately, and this is why I mentioned this EIS that's out, it's society. You folks are going to decide whether or not these experiments are going to happen, and then if they happen, whether any range-wide type of management is going to occur. And of course, then that's the debate is going to be all about that. And I wanted to end here, but just pose a few questions that, obviously you can ask any of the questions you like, but some of the questions to me that are important, and this is you hear all the time, is it ethical to kill some individuals of one species to save another? And I want to point out, no one is proposing, despite what you hear in the news place, to annihilate barred owls. I saw it just today. There's a new group that came out. It's some appeared to me in a kind of radical group, that they were claiming that the federal government was going to exterminate. And I think they used both terms, annihilate and exterminate the barred owl. Well, no one is proposing to do that. What they're talking about is initially removal experiment, and then if it went beyond that, it would be something where the barred owl numbers would be kept at a level that the two species could coexist. If you read the EIS, no one's proposing annihilating barred owls. We're talking about coexistence of the two species. So there's that question that I think needs to be debated. It also should be debated, if human actions have put one species in jeopardy, is it ethical to do nothing to help save that species? So if we have created the dilemma for the spotted owl, is it okay to just back away and say, okay, we're not going to do anything about that? So that's another issue. I've heard a lot of people say, let nature take its course. In other words, you're not going to attempt to alter the course of natural events. Is this a viable option? Is there any place on Earth anymore where we could say that we can allow nature to take its course? I'm not so sure. To me, that even makes sense. That in extreme case, you could say weeding your garden is not allowing nature to take its course. You're discriminating. You're selecting for one species over another. So that might seem quite extreme, but the notion in this day and age, if there's any place on Earth when we can, quote, let nature take its course, at least to me, doesn't make sense. The other question that we want to talk about a little bit more is what's wrong with the option of just protecting more habitat? And then ultimately, how would range-wide barred owl management be implemented? What might that look like? And then I guess the last question, is this really a choice of one owl over another, or is it a choice to have both species? And I guess I already said what my bias was relative to this. So with that, I would like to end and open this up for some questions. Yes.
Why does Simpson or Green Diamond care if they're barred owls or spotted owls or both?
That's a great question. It's because of that HCP I mentioned, and that puts the company in a unique position. Success for Green Diamond is to have lots of spotted owls on their managed land. That's what their HCP, it's an agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service that allows them to have some take of spotted owls, which means cutting down some of their habitat, but they also have to show that they're going to sustain spotted owl populations at the same time. So success for them is having lots of spotted owls, and for a lot of companies, you wouldn't think that would be success. So for Green Diamond, Simpson, the reason why the barred owl is a problem is they can't show success for their even though they're saying we're growing lots of good spotted owl habitat. If spotted owl numbers are going in the toilet because of barred owls, they ultimately people would say, well, it's your habitat is the problem, or potentially to be a problem. So it's all about showing success for the HCP and being able to demonstrate that we can, in fact, grow spotted owl habitat, and we can have high levels of spotted owls on a managed timberland. So that's why the company cares. Another question?
I have a question about the long-term logistics of it. So is saying necessarily the pathway from east and other habitats is still there for them to enter the habitat? Would the lethal program have to continue continuously, because the differences between the species size and the ability is still there?
Right, and that's kind of this one question here. What would the range-wide barred owl management look like? And no one has gotten that far. But let's say they do the removal experiments in the other states, and they all come up with the same conclusion that yes, we can control barred owl numbers, and we do. Spotted owls come back. Okay, what would we do? Well, presumably what they would do is, the other thing that just came out is critical habitat for spotted owls. In other words, areas that have been designated across the Northwest that the Fish and Wildlife thinks is critical to the spotted owl. Presumably, and I don't work for the Fish and Wildlife Service, but presumably the decision would be made that in some of these critical habitat areas, we're going to control barred owl numbers. And by control, that doesn't mean they're going to remove all barred owls. They're just going to keep barred owl numbers at a level that both species are able to survive in that area. Presumably that would they have to do. Now the question is, how long would they have to do that? Potentially indefinitely. So there is that issue, but there's also the other aspect from an evolutionary and ecological aspect. When you have two species that are suddenly find themselves in this kind of a battle, so to speak, over time there's going to be very strong selection for spotted owls that figure out how to deal with barred owls. Because obviously if you can figure out how to live and breed on a landscape with barred owls, your offspring are going to be perpetuated, right? So in time, you could imagine that a spotted owl would emerge that has learned to adapt to barred owls. But the problem is the invasion is so rapid. And in fact, I talked to Jack Dumbacher. He's an evolutionary geneticist. I said, how long would something like this take? Well, generally they say maybe 20 generations. And a generation for a spotted owl is about 10 years. So for that kind of selection to occur, to essentially evolve a new and improved spotted owl that could persist on a landscape with barred owls, you're talking about 200 years. So no, it isn't a short. If they do this, it will definitely be for a long term. But by the way, this isn't unprecedented at all. There's many species that are being managed this way long term. And so, yeah, it would be a long-term cost. It would not be a short-term fix. That's correct, yes.
I heard the president has weighed in on this, President Obama, and
I don't think so. I think where it gets back to Obama is just that the Obama administration put out the EIS to do the removal experiment. So I don't think Obama has specifically said anything about it, although this one website I saw claimed that Obama had said we were going to annihilate all the barred owls. I don't think that that's happened. I think it's the Obama administration obviously is responsible for everything that comes out.
what
Yeah.
part of the administration, I mean, is it?
Well, the Fish and Wildlife Service is in the Department of the Interior, right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
No, I get confused because NIMS is in one and Fish and Wildlife Service is in the other. Is it Department of Agriculture? Interior. Okay, it is Interior. So yeah, that's the department. Any other questions?
The barred owl is moving in on the spotted owl. They're not killing them. They're just moving them out of that range. Are they still staying in the?
Well, from what we've seen there, you think about. I guess I didn't mention this, but spotted owls can potentially live a long time. The longest one we've documented was 20 years. And so even though they're displaced by the barred owls, they can still live on that landscape. As long as you don't hoot and try to defend a territory, you can live there. And because you fly around silently, you're basically invisible. And so you could live there, and you can continue to feed yourself, and you could live out your entire life, but you're not going to have much success establishing a territory and trying to nest. So the point is, yes, they can live for a long time. And one of the interesting things is, it doesn't hardly get any press, but in British Columbia, they're doing barred owl removal. And they also thought all the spotted owls were gone. And they are actually doing captive breeding because they thought the last of the spotted owls were gone. And lo and behold, they started doing removal. It was a little bit different approach. All the most recently occupied spotted owl territories, they established some area, I don't remember what, it's like a 5-kilometer radius around that, and removed every barred owl from a 5-kilometer radius. And they've had something like 5 of these now have been reoccupied by spotted owls. And they don't even know where the spotted owls came from. They thought they were all gone. So clearly the point is that the spotted owls can persist on the landscape a long time after the barred owls move in. But long term, what is the prognosis? Well, if you're not breeding, at some point, even if you live 25 or 30 years, you are going to be gone. So, the long-term prognosis isn't good, but short-term, like a decade or so, the spotted owls are still presumably going to be out there. They're just going to be under the radar and not you can't find them when you go out and hoot.
Have you seen any effective vegetation treatments on green diamond land, either foraging or nesting roosting habitat to facilitate the retention of the spotted owl and the exclusion of the barred owl?
Okay.
Density thinning down less than 1%?
Yeah, that's the habitat solution, and that I referred to down here. Why can't we just protect more habitat? Kind of within that is the same idea of why can't we, promote habitat?
Not protect it necessarily
Yeah.
in the sense, but manipulate it
Right.
more effectively.
Those experiments are going on as we speak. People are looking at that, and there's a number of studies going on looking at these interactions. And presumably there might be, but the problem is let's say you determine you need some kind of forest structure, then you have to create that forest structure, which may, depending on what you need, could take many decades. So that will be, the question was asked earlier also about, are we going to have to do this forever? Are we going to have to control barred owls forever? That ties into this question is, over time, we should learn more about habitat that favors spotted owls over barred owls. And presumably, one of the things that you would hypothesize, as just any biologist would, is that if you're smaller if you're a smaller bird, you can take advantage of a denser forest because you can fly through spaces that are smaller. These birds, by the way, they all live below the canopy. They don't fly above the canopy like a hawk. They're under the canopy. They're flying through the trees. A barred owl has a bigger wingspan. It's going to need a forest that is a little bit more open for it to manipulate. So presumably you could select for a denser forest, and that would potentially favor the spotted owl. But then, of course, there's all kinds of issues. There's the issue of fire, and so if you have denser forests, then they're more prone to fire. So you're going to have fire hazard issues. So even though I'm not saying we would give up on that idea that we could eventually promote forests that favor spotted owls over barred owls, it's not a short-term solution. It's a 50-year, in my opinion, 50 to 100-year solution, not anything that we can do in a short
You
term.
would think that your mid-canopy would need to be more open so that the spotted owl could get to the forest floor to get their food?
Well, but the key issue here is avoiding your competitor, and you want to go somewhere that they don't like to go. And right now in Olympic National Park, the barred owls, and there they have a lot of topographic relief. The barred owls are all selecting the lower elevation stuff, and the spotted owls are being pushed up higher and higher, not because that's what they necessarily like, but that's where they could go. They go to avoid the barred owls. So the issue you would have as a spotted owl is you don't get to go where you want to go. You have to go where you're not going to get harassed by a barred owl. And so we would need to develop forest structure that provides that opportunity, a place they can go to avoid, again, being harassed by a barred owl. Any other questions? I guess so.
Is the spotted owl still in the HSU?
It is. And presumably you can go up there and see it. Yeah, it probably lived there for 20 years. Chris?
With the spotted owls, I know typically with the barred and with the northern spotted, they mate for life. So when you have a hybrid like that, do you find that you're going to be reproducing from that same pair, or do you think it was just kind of a random fluke that happened?
Well, the spotted owls, I can't speak for barred owls because we haven't done this kind of work, but we've been banding spotted owls for 20 years now and keeping track of the individuals. And they're about like humans, I would say. When you say they mate for life, they have about a 5% annual divorce rate. And so they break up all the time for various reasons. So that when they initially set up, usually that's a 1 year type of phenomenon when you have that, and then they go on their way the next time. That is not, I don't think anyone's documented that as a long-term stable type of relationship. Again, I characterize it as a desperation type of thing, and so it's a short-term type of phenomenon.
Are you seeing changes in the predator barred owl populations at all?
The predator of the barred owl? Well, they potentially, the things that would kill a barred owl would be like a great horned owl. These barred owls, I don't understand it. I've been out there calling, and they'll come in, there'll be a great horned owl calling nearby, and they'll fly in oblivious to the fact that that's out there. I just think they're an aggressive bird, and I think they don't worry about it. It's been documented that they have occasionally been killed by things like great horned owls, but I think they just, they're like a pit bull or something. They just think they're tough enough that nothing's going to bother them. Outside of at night, a great horned owl is the only thing that's going to take them, other than a mammalian predator if they happen to be on the ground and a bobcat or something pounced on them. In the daytime, I don't think like a red-tailed hawk. I don't think a red-tailed hawk would want to tussle with one. They might, but it wouldn't be the kind of thing they'd take on very readily. Goshawks, I don't think goshawks would want to tackle them either. So they don't have, the bottom line is they don't have many predators out there. Particularly if you're a female barred owl, you're big enough that there's no one out there that's going to really want to take you on.
Well, when we see an increase in the population of a barred owl, it
Mhm.
would seem intuitive that the predator would follow that, would be
But-
increasing.
Yeah, but see, the reason that's not happening is they're a top predator. So there's not much that in their native in the East Coast. There's really nothing that really preys on them to speak of. So what you're thinking about is if you're a rabbit or some species like that that has a lot of predators that prey on those, then you could expect that as rabbit numbers fluctuate, the things that prey on them fluctuate. But when you're a top predator, you basically, there's no one eating you, and so you're influenced by the things that you eat, not the things that eat you. So that's, it's kind of an advantage of being at the top. It's still a hard life being a predator and finding enough to eat, but you generally don't have to worry about being eaten.
Do the displaced, like, spotted owl couples, do they tend to maintain their pair bonds? Because I know she said that the 4 of the original pairs came back.
You know that
Displaced?
we don't have enough data on that, but my guess is probably not, because they do a lot of reinforcement of their pair bonds. They in their courtship, the male feeds the female. There's so many human analogies here. It's amazing. I mean, it's like take them out to dinner, right? So the male feeds the female to prove to her he's a good provider. That's part of their courtship. They do some allopreening and such, but that's all of that stuff is associated with mating time. So my guess is, if they're not mating, they're not doing all that kind of stuff, and so they're going to tend to drift apart. So in that one case that I mentioned where they came in 13 days, went back, and the original pair was there. That's the only time that we've had both members of the pair back at the same site. So I think in general, they split up, and potentially, one of them goes off and tries to find a territory somewhere else. Is there a question over here? Oh.
3 sort of unrelated questions. When you say they defend their territory, either the spotted owl or the barred owl, do you mean that they attack each other in the air and it's a fight to death? Or they attack a nest and kill the babies? Or they just make it uncomfortable by swerving, swooping around and the guy goes away?
Most of it, in territorial species like that, it seldom comes down to fighting. It's mostly standing back at a distance and hooting at one another. And you're shouting back and forth, so to speak, this is my territory, go away. And usually one of them gives up in those kind of situations. So that most of the time it's just the interaction is hooting back and forth. That's like between, say, 2 spotted owls when a new one tries to come in. With the barred owls, what's happened, and we don't see this very often. In fact, we've only witnessed it once. But with the barred owls, they're going to come in, and they're not necessarily going to be intimidated by the hooting of the spotted owl. So potentially there will be an actual interaction. We had witness one where a barred owl came in and hit the spotted owl. So they do, in fact, physically attack each other. And a spotted owl will attack another spotted owl if it doesn't leave the territory. But it's not really a fight to the death so much. It's normally they hit the bird and the bird is going to fly off. In fact, a graduate student did a study where he went in with not my fakey looking decoy, but he took real stuffed barred owls and real stuffed spotted owls, if there's such a thing as real stuffed, but anyway, from an actual skin. And he would go into spotted owl territories and put out decoys of spotted owls and play calls and see what the resident birds would do. And then he would put in a barred owl decoy and do that. And then he also went to barred owl territories and did both spotted owls and barred owls. And what he found is that these spotted owls are not wimps at all. They would come in and attack. And since this thing couldn't defend itself, they would even attack a barred owl. And by attack, I mean hit it, knock it off of its perch, and hit it with some force. And of course, the barred owls would potentially do the same thing, but because they're bigger, they're going to tend to win it. So eventually, yes, there would be some actual physical contact there, and the bigger bird is going to displace the smaller bird. But most of the time, they just hoot back and forth at each other like spotted owl, barred owl, they tend to just hoot at each other and then one goes on its way. And it doesn't that often.
Then I have two more questions. In the hybrid,
Uh-huh.
the male with the female spotted owl, do you look at the female spotted owl on a nest and see she has eggs, and you're watching that, and then they hatch out to the hybrid? How do you determine that it was that male? How do you determine male, female?
Well, they're paired up, so you wouldn't see two spotted owls or two barred owls or whatever in the same, a male and a female together unless they're paired up. And you see them interacting. They're feeding each other. They do contact calls and stuff.
Oh, you would see them?
You would see them together doing their thing.
Okay.
So you would see like I was talking about in the situation we're talking about, you would see a male, you'd go in there and there'd be, lo and behold, there's a male spotted owl, and then on the nest sits a female barred owl. And by the way, the reasons, there are two reasons why it tends to be that way, and that is, at least my hypothesis, is in these raptors, the female is always bigger than the male. And there's a bunch of hypotheses as to why. And one of them might be related to the fact that they have talons and they can potentially hurt one another. And if you're the female sitting in the nest, you want to be big enough that the male's not going to be a threat to you. But there's a number of hypotheses why, but whatever. If you had a male barred owl and a female spotted owl, then you would potentially end up with the male being larger than the female. And presumably, if you're a raptor, that's not acceptable. You're not going to have a mate that's bigger than you. The other reason, and this is the one that I'm sure is a clincher, is remember the courtship's all about feeding. Okay, if you're a spotted owl, you're going to be really impressed when the male brings you a big fat wood rat. But if you're a female spotted owl and a male barred owl flies up with a worm and says, "Look what I got," you're not going to be very impressed, right? And so I think the courtship falls apart because they're offering them the wrong stuff.
And then my last question, I'm on the Klamath River a lot and traveling the Ball Hill Johnson's Road. And what specific, I know that these markers I see on bushes, silver and red, I know that they mean that somebody's hooted an owl out there, but what does a silver and the red mean?
I don't know.
They're all along the road with the
I'm guessing that's maybe the Urox
No,
stuff.
it's you.
No? I'm not aware of
Because
what.
I've seen a hooter, I've talked to a hooter out there.
Oh, really?
And they hide in the brush or they hoot, and then they mark the territory that they've seen.
Yeah.
Somebody's answered them, but I don't know the difference between silver and red.
I don't either.
I use silver. I'm working for Six Rivers. We used silver last year. And the Cooper Reservation used the red.
I didn't hear his answer.
Cooper Reservation using red and they use silver.
Different
Oh.
countries use different colors.
They use silver
Okay.
and the Cooper Reservation.
Good question.
Oh, okay.
When you're calling an owl, do you use a recorded device to call, or do you do it
Yeah,
yourself?
and I can't believe I didn't bring that in here, but we used to hoot by voice, and we all did, and we thought that was, that's the only thing you had to do. And that was in the early days before barred owls were around. And I didn't mention this other aspect, but one of the other problems with the barred owl is spotted owls have tended to shut up and are much less likely to call. And so what we've discovered is we can no longer hoot them up with our voice effectively because they're much less likely to respond. So we have to get them to respond. We have these new digital callers, the one I showed you the picture of, real high quality sound with a whole repertoire of different calls. You can't just do a 4-note hoot and expect you're going to get an answer. You need a repertoire of calls because you have to get a spot owl to respond now, you got to really get them upset. In the old days, it didn't take anything to get one to respond, but we now have to use electronic callers. And interestingly enough, many times what gets a spotted owl fired up is when you played the spotted owl calls, they don't respond. Then you switch and do a couple of barred owl calls, and then suddenly the female will answer up really all agitated and such. So basically the problem is barred owls have become much more reluctant to call, and we have to use electronic callers. In fact, the Fish and Wildlife Service have now basically required surveyors to use electronic callers because the detection probabilities have dropped off dramatically, like dropped in half. They used to be 70 to 80%. You could go out and call 78% of the time if there was a spotted owl there, he would answer. Now it's around 30 to 40%. And it's again, because barred owls are out there, and if you hoot, you're potentially going to bring attention on yourself, and you don't want to do that unless you absolutely have to defend your territory. Question way in the back.
In the preliminary studies that Green Diamond was done on removal of the barred owl, did you notice any greater success of repopulation by the spotted owl in certain densities of forest, like say you have old growth versus selective versus?
No, what tended to happen, I would say in general, is that they just came back to the same types of territories that they occupied before. So it was, we're finding them in the exact same spots we were before pretty much. Same kind of habitat. It's just that they're able to move in there now because they have an area where they're not being rebuffed by a barred owl.
I was going to say, essentially, they're not responding to calls as much anymore. Does that mean in some ways they're less territorial than they used to be?
No, I wouldn't say that the spotted owls are less territorial because they're ultimately going to defend a territory. But they're in the past they were more likely to get in that territorial mode more quickly. Now I think they're still defending a territory. I just think they're much more. They're going to be more prudent about when they actually decide, okay, I need to defend my territory. So in other words, if they hear you off at a distance, they're going to say, I don't really need to deal with that guy. I'm going to let it go. In the old days, they would have hooted back. Now that until you really become a real threat to them, they're not going to hoot back.
In some ways, does that mean that they kind of have a higher tolerance level for each other now and like passing maybe?
Well, I don't know that I would say they have a higher tolerance. I think it's just it's all about, if you're a spotted owl, it's all about avoiding unnecessary conflicts, so to speak. Excuse me?
They're adapting themselves to how many.
That's right. And that goes back to that one question about do we have to do this forever? I mean, already you've seen a lot of adaptations in these spotted owls, how they're responding around barred owls. There's presumably they're not actually able to successfully nest and find mates and nest on the slide, but they are adapting. You get a question in the back there.
Yeah, so the population is declining, and said also spotted owls are less responsive, so that being less responsive, that could have influenced that decline. It's still been there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Those are apparent declines. The declines probably aren't nearly as bad as they appeared when I first talked about those declines, because part of that is the fact that they're hard to detect now. So that would exacerbate that downward trend. It still, of course, is bad when you look at fecundity rates or reproductive rates that are dropping too. So even though it's maybe not quite as dire as it looks, it's still not a sustainable type of situation for those populations. Troy?
I have another question. It's when we started doing the spotted owl work, it seemed like there was always floater spotted owls around, and I'm wondering if there could be some type of inhibitive hormonal function that when the spotted owls feel the threat, or basically they know they're living in the shadow of something more dominant, that they use the ability to do courtship or actually urine at the nest in the first place. It's funny that they're not, doesn't seem like they're nesting at all. You would think they would find just a kennel with a platform or anything to drop eggs. Other birds do that, but spotted owl seems to be not nesting.
Well, there are occasionally evidence of some birds that do manage to nest in, kind of on the sly, so to speak. Because every once in a while, we pick up in an area that appears to be totally swamped with barred owls. Every once in a while, we'll go in there in the late summer and pick up a fledgling spotted owl, and we'll go, where did this thing come from? We don't know for sure where it came from, but possibly, there was some nesting. So I think there's always a little bit of that's happening, but I don't think that's ever going to be enough to sustain the population, with the barred owl numbers the way they tend to be.
I heard a story that green diamond Simpson landed a spotted owl up in the general Hoopaw area and later found that same bird in the Mad River drainage south of Corbell. Is that?
Well, we have birds, in this area, the demographic study areas are on green diamond. We're banding birds. Hoopaw is banding birds, and then there's what's called the Willow Creek study area, the Forest Service that is banding birds. We get exchanged back and forth all the time and always have. So, a spotted owl can easily disperse 20, 30 miles. Obviously they could go even farther. They got wings, they can fly. I think the furthest we've ever documented is like 100 miles. So yes, they can clearly disperse relatively long distance. The interesting thing I didn't mention is that barred owls are fantastic dispersers. They've been documented in single individuals, something like 500 miles. So they can disperse very long distances. You could almost imagine, talking about them getting across the Great Plains there, you could have an individual that could almost cross by itself in its lifetime, go all the way across the prairies because of they have amazing dispersal abilities. So, yeah.
I think you might have a graphic that showed some spotted owls in some southwest states for the populations there. How far down is the barred owl continuing to colonize further south, and is there a chance that they'll affect those populations?
Yeah, they are now, that one graphic, if you look very closely, it appeared as if barred owls have not made it all the way down into the southern Sierras. Well, they are all the way down into the southern Sierras now. So, yeah, they're continuing to go further south. Now, I don't know about I don't think there's a relatively isolated population of spotted owls in the Santa Barbara Mountains. Does that make sense? I think it's the Santa Barbara Mountains. I don't know if barred owls have showed up there yet. So I guess one quick question, and then maybe I'll let everybody leave. I'm always expecting when I give this talk that I'm going to get some verbal abuse, and no one has done that. How many of you that were here would strongly oppose doing barred owl removal?
Good eating.
That's actually quite surprising. Maybe, I don't know if this is a very, this is obviously not a random look at our population, but I always think there's going to be more resistance to the idea, and so far in my audience, I've been kind of surprised that people haven't been more resistant. By the way, being on the spotted owl recovery team, we had a stakeholder meeting where we invited all the environmental groups, PETA and everybody, to come in and have a discussion about this. And the interesting thing was, at the end of that time, basically all these environmental groups said, we hate the idea that you're going to kill barred owls, but we have a fundamental conservation dilemma, and in that we can't allow spotted owls to go extinct. So if we're convinced that that's the only way to save the spotted owl, we would support it. But we can't publicly support it because our membership is divided right down the middle, and half of them absolutely hate the idea and the other half think we should do it. So we have to basically kind of not say anything about it and just kind of stay in the background. So I think actually most of the environmental groups are not, if they're convinced that we really need to do this to save the spotted owls, most of them probably won't actively try to stop it. I don't know that for a fact, of course. the EIS is just now out there. And again, I'd like to encourage everyone to look at that and provide comments. That's why it's out there. You're supposed to comment. And you may think, I used to think this before I was on the recovery team, that the public doesn't matter. You know, you can't influence what the Fish and Wildlife Service does. That's absolutely wrong. They are very sensitive to what the public says. And if the majority of the public says, we don't want this, they won't do it. And so you can make a difference what you say. And if the majority say, yes, we believe that these experiments are important to do, that will also mean something.
If the EIS goes through and we decide, okay, yes, we want to move forward with this plan, how soon, well, first of all, how soon would it be that they made that decision, and how soon would it actually be implemented if it goes forward?
Well, it's a 90-day comment period, I think. And at the end of that 90 days, they will look at all the comments. And if there is an overwhelming outcry against it, if comments tend to be neutral or you know, or some on either side, then they will move forward with it. And I don't know exactly how long it would take to implement it, but it'll probably be at least another year before they implement and actually start doing these other experiments.
How does a person make a comment?
Well, if you get on that website and it will explain right in there on that EIS how to make comments. You bet.
If you support it, it's also important to make those comments as well.
Absolutely, that's right. They want to know people that support it, and they want to obviously know people that don't and why.
And after the record of decision is issued, there's also an appeal period, and after that,
Yeah, those are meetings.
go to court. People that are standing there, it takes a long time.
So I want to know how many people don't care one way or the other.
Well, there's always that.
Isn't that relevant to the?
The people that don't care one way or the other, they'll move forward.